I'm good, and we're about to get started here.
I made it.
Hey, we're actually on camera. We're actually on camera. Okay, everybody, welcome to the March 29th Grants Pass City Council Workshop. Here's a nice sunny day out there. It's a good day for a long meeting. All right, first up on our agenda, we have an urban campground presentation, and the city manager is going to get us started.
Good. Go ahead. Good morning, Mayor, Council, and invited guests. Thank you for coming today. So I'm entering the subject of urban campgrounds. Relationship to council goals is this supports council's goals for facilitate sustainable manageable growth. Objective 2 in your strategic plan, encourage an environment which provides for the growth of affordable housing opportunities for the variety of Grants Pass resident needs, which was a 3-star item that came out of strategic planning both last year and this year. And specifically, action number 2, which came out of strategic planning this year, facilitate development of a homeless shelter and/or urban campground. So the agenda, what I have before you today, will start with Oregon Revised Statutes. I wanted to go over a little bit about what Oregon Revised Statute states about urban campgrounds, to give you that legislative background. Talk about the City of Grants Pass's land use applicability. Then discuss with you the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness recommendations when it comes to urban campgrounds. Just discuss some general benefits of urban campgrounds. Then I've got some detailed slides on this Eugene's urban campgrounds, which they call rest stops. There's a number of slides on that. And then we also have some slides on the City of Medford's urban campgrounds. And with us today, we have representatives from Rogue Retreat, Chad McComas, Liz Adams, and Justin Hahn. Or if you could raise your hands just so council sees who you are, they're back there. They're here and present to answer any questions you may have after the presentation. We also have the City of Medford Police, and we've got Sergeant Kirkpatrick, and Sergeant is right there, and he is also present to be able to answer any questions specifically to what the City of Medford is doing and how they've implemented their program. Also have, after that, we'll discuss facilitation and implementation considerations. And again, Rogue Retreat is here to answer any of those questions since they actually have an urban campground running. Along with UCAN, Kelly Wessels is here. Oh, there's Kelly right there. And she is here also to answer any potential questions, as she would be one of the key partners, especially from a financial perspective, in helping us with an urban campground. And then we'll finish with a call to action and council discussion. So let's talk about Oregon Revised Statutes. What does Oregon Revised Statutes say we can or can't do, or how do they address urban campgrounds? So ORS 446.265 states that transitional housing accommodations are intended to be used by individuals or families on a limited basis for seasonal, emergency, or transitional housing purposes, and may include yurts, huts, cabins, fabric structures, tents, or similar accommodations. The transitional housing accommodations may provide parking facilities, walkways, access to water, toilets, showers, laundry, cooking, telephone, or other services, either through separate or shared facilities. ORS 446.265 goes on to further state that inside an urban growth boundary, a local government, such as the city, may authorize the establishment of transitional housing accommodations used as individual living units by one or more individuals. Use of transitional housing accommodations is limited to persons who lack permanent or safe shelter and who cannot be placed in other low-income housing. A local government may limit the maximum amount of time that an individual or family may use the accommodations. It also states in what you would have as a right, also the City of Grants Pass may authorize the establishment of transitional housing accommodations, but in that process, usually there's a land use process that is required. So from a City of Grants Pass perspective, land use-wise, and urban campgrounds, how do they mix, and where does that play in? Currently right now within our code, urban campgrounds are allowed in industrial and business park zoning. We have about 79.5 acres of that. That is designated on the map behind me in the purplish hues of color. So these areas here is the industrial and business park, primarily here, up here north of town, and then we've got some spots over in this area. Now, council is considering allowing for social services to also be in general commercial. Now, if that was to be accomplished, that would open it up and broaden the potential areas that urban campgrounds could be designated to the areas shown also in red. So that would primarily be up and down 6th and 7th corridor, and especially along Redwood Highway and these other little red areas. So that would include and allow for both industrial, business park, and general commercial siting of an urban campground. If council continues to move in that direction, you are just currently considering it. So when it comes to urban campgrounds, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness has provided some cautions and considerations for cities and municipalities to just consider when taking a look at urban campgrounds. This has also been endorsed by the National Health Care for the Homelessness Council with this document. So they recommend that if your community is exploring these steps, that you take a look at some of these caveats. First is creating these environments may make it look and feel like the community is taking action to end homelessness on the surface, but by themselves, they have little impact on reducing homelessness. I think this point is that this is one step in a continuum of services that would need to be needed in order to reduce that homelessness impact. Creating these environments can be costly in money, staff time, and in effort. These environments can prove difficult to manage and maintain. And although often proposed as temporary approaches, these programs prove difficult to close once they are open. This document continues to talk about maybe some considerations if municipalities want to continue to look at designating urban campgrounds, that we also consider the following. Are we doing all we can within our existing emergency shelter programs? And can we also create more effective indoor shelters or crisis housing options if needed? I think that's going to looking at trying to create a higher level of service than just an urban campground. Are we planning and budgeting for how people staying in these settings will be able to exit homelessness and access permanent housing? The multiple steps that are necessary in order to truly address the housing issue, have we also addressed those issues? Are we aiming as high as we can in improving a high-quality environment within these temporary settings, such as an urban campground? And are we assessing the outcomes, the impacts, and the cost effectiveness of these efforts? Now, when it comes to an urban campground, there are also some stated benefits out there that, and this is one of the reasons, these are some of the reasons why cities, communities are looking at having urban campgrounds in their communities. One is safety and security. An urban campground can offer some degree of safety and security for the residents by providing an enclosed space with some level of security and also some assurances that some of their belongings would remain in a safe location and they don't have to worry about those things during the day. Also, urban campgrounds do create somewhat of a community. And studies have shown that sometimes the unhoused lack that sense of community. And this would be a starting point for that. And an urban campground could also provide that sense of community where they can start to learn and share from each other. Autonomy, having a private space, even if it only is a tent, does provide some dignity, restoring effects. Stability, It reduces personal stress of being unhoused to allow an individual to focus more energy on rehabilitation. And then also, from a health perspective, it does provide for more efficient service delivery to a centralized group of people from a standpoint of being able to provide medical, mental, chemical dependency, and life skills. Now, when we're talking about urban campgrounds, we're not just talking about tents. We're talking also about pallet shelters or Conestoga huts. These are other ways that people have established urban campgrounds. For instance, the pallet shelters here are gaining in popularity, of course, because they do provide some additional shelter than the tents. And these cost around $6,800 per unit. So let's talk about the Eugene community and what they do. And there are some details here because we didn't get a chance to have a Eugene representative present. So I've provided some additional details for Eugene to try to answer most questions you might have from that community. We also have some additional slides representing the city of Medford, maybe not in as much detail because they are present here to be able to answer your questions on these items. So Eugene calls their urban campgrounds rest spots, which contains 20 tents or Conestoga huts per location, and they have 5 locations within their community. Their locations are chosen by trying to minimize the impacts to neighbors in sensitive areas. They're not located in parks or environmentally sensitive areas. And an environmentally sensitive area may be a wetland or, say, a floodplain area. Those would be considered environmentally sensitive areas. They're not close to residential or schools. They're suitable to camping and have some kind of road access. And they really try to make sure they have access to transportation and other services provided. So they're not way out in the country, but they do have the ability to get services. Now, the city did mention that it is difficult to find suitable sites that meet that criteria, but that is their goal when they look at trying to find new sites. The city of Eugene also started to try to find a site in each one of their wards to try to distribute and disperse the rest areas throughout the city. Eugene rest stops. The cost of establishing and operating each rest stop is paid for and managed by a nonprofit organization. They have 2 main nonprofit organizations that take a look at that, manage those rest stops: Community Supported Shelters and Nightingale Health Sanctuary. The land is provided by the city or the county or the Eugene Mission. So within the rest stops, individuals 18 or over experiencing homelessness are allowed. Applicants are screened to determine a good fit. Rest stops are intended to be temporary respite. The managing nonprofit works to connect residents with support and resources to move towards a sustainable housing solution. So it is one of the many steps in trying to deal with the unhoused in the housing issue. So within the rest stops, residents sign an agreement to abide by the rules. They use best practices for water and handling prepared food, cooking and cleaning, and those kind of things within the rest stops. They have 0 tolerance for violent behavior, alcohol, or drug use on site. And children are prohibited from staying the night at those rest stops. Participants also must attend monthly meetings and work parties and do personal check-ins with action plan advisors. Every participant in the rest stops holds some kind of volunteer task or role within the rest stop. So it's it goes back to that benefit of community. It helps to create that community, then that part that might have been missing in that individual's life. The general time limit is about 10 months per participant. And participants, except for the gatekeeper volunteers, are required to leave the site from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. The Eugene rest stops are secured with a fence and a vehicle gate and a pedestrian gate. They have Conestoga huts or raised tent platforms with durable covers. Common space with wood fire heat and solar charging stations for small devices are also on each rest stop. Common kitchen and propane cook stove, running water, counter space, and food storage. They have a place for the gatekeeper volunteer, porta potties and garbage receptacles, raised pathways within the area, and also garden beds, but that is participant initiated. So here's an overhead schematic of what one of theirs potentially looks like in one of their sites here, which sort of highlights the previous slide and how they lay that out. Each of their rest stops, each of their safe spots or microsites has a camp facilitator who serves as a go-to resource for everybody in the camp. Service staff serves three main roles. They have peer support specialists, they have camp facilitators, and then they also have service navigators. And those FTEs are for their 5 sites. That's not just per site, that's for their whole operation. So moving on to more locally, our Medford area and Rogue Retreat. You're all familiar with Rogue Retreat and the great services they provide. So this is a sort of a highlight breakdown of Rogue Retreat's operations. They do have site obscured fencing within their urban campgrounds. They have 24/7 on-site staffing. They provide case management at those sites, which includes drug recovery and mental health service focus. They have restrooms, hand washing stations, waste services, and there is a law enforcement presence from the standpoint of increased area patrol when those were initiated and put in. And this is a picture of one of their urban campsites. Within the first 2 months of their opening, they had 114 homeless served. They currently, to date, have about 377 served, with 133 successfully transitioned forward. They have 60 campsites currently right now, which cost about $40,000 per year, and that equals out to about $23 per campsite. And again, when I say campsite, that's campsites within an urban campground, not to confuse. They have 60 campgrounds. They have 60 campsites within an urban campground. City of Medford has been an integral partner with this process. Back in September of 2019, the City of Medford created a livability team. That livability team is dedicated police and code enforcement personnel to the downtown area and the Bear Creek Greenway. One of their goals is finding a balance between enforcement and outreach. They address livability concerns such as homelessness and chronic nuisance houses. They created an urban campground referral system and screening process that helps refer and screen individuals into Rogue Retreat's urban campground. And they take down names, veteran status, what kind of services are you already receiving, and they help transport the homeless individuals to those campgrounds. And Sergeant Kirkpatrick's here to answer any questions on that. Now moving on to urban campgrounds facilitation and implementation. Some of the things that communities look at, some of the key items in order to start this process is, what are our desired outcomes, and determining what those outcomes are. Identifying a lead nonprofit organization such as someone like Rogue Retreat or one of the nonprofits that the City of Eugene uses. Defining campground organizational rules. Determining a proper property location and what land use requirements also apply. You also have the not in my backyard community acceptance aspect. That's the fear of the unknown or misconceptions and the realities of what an urban campground is, and those are things that would need to be addressed. There's of course a budget and where financially the monies will come to help operate this. And then what community partners do we have to help that continuum of service and that continuum of care that makes these programs so successful. That includes case management components of addiction, behavioral health, correctional reentry, and youth and family. And then operational services when it comes to the urban campgrounds, and what are those rules and defining those. That's really up to the lead nonprofit organization with the assistance potentially of the city. But they really need to look at campground organization rules, safety, is there any kind of food handling issues, garbage and waste, rodent and pest prevention, sharps and needle addressing that, general safety, health and hygiene, and do these nonprofits have a proven track record? Are some of the things that cities are interested in. So call to action, of course, is at council's discretion. You have a number of things that you can consider. Continue and facilitate the implementation process, which would mean define your desired outcomes, identify a lead nonprofit organization, and then the next step, if we have that, is to explore some property and identify some property for that and move forward through that list of the slide that I showed a couple of slides previous. You could postpone this action. You can remove this action from the strategic plan if this is no longer a goal that council so desires. With me today as invites, we want to thank very much the following: Rogue Retreat, City of Medford, and UCAN for being here to answer any of your specific questions with regards to their operations and how they've addressed those things. And with that, Mayor and Council, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Does anybody have any questions for Aaron before we talk to our guests? Joel?
So Aaron, AllCare, who's a very skilled partner, and the state, with their grants, that it's been a recent development. Can you fill us in there on what the status is between the state of Oregon and the funding and AllCare's grant proposal, and what stage that's at? Because it seems like that's going concurrently and that could duplicate or complement what we're doing.
Well, I don't think I'm the best person to speak for AllCare, and we are relatively new in this process of the distribution of funds. I do know, though, that AllCare, being the organization they are, they do have a focus on the housing issues that we have in the community, and that they are working on helping implement programs that would be part of that continuum care that would be associated with a step that maybe an urban campground would also fill.
Well, it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's also true that they got a grant supposedly to turn a motel into homelessness housing, and that they're moving ahead on plans on that, though they're yet to be finalized.
Yeah, that's still things that they're looking at interest in, and to confirm whether or not they have those resources. I am not the individual to confirm if those resources have been actually acquired, but they are and have shown interest and action in looking at moving that direction.
One of the things that strikes me is, of course, they have mental health. They have access to mental health resources. They have run a Medicaid for a long period of time. Have done it very successfully with a lot of support from the state and the local medical providers. And from what I understand, they have been successful recipients of a grant to do that. And it seems like we don't want to make any final decisions, I think, until we know the total picture of what we're looking at, just so that we don't waste people's efforts and energy. And my understanding is also they're in partnership with Rogue Retreat, and I don't want to, I see some heads nodding that yes, that's the case. So it sounds like we got the right players working together. We don't have it. They've done it on their own, and we need to support them. But for us to make decisions independent of that at this point in time might not be fully aware or complementary to what they're doing. So maybe we could ask that of Rogue Retreat as well. I don't know.
That would probably be a better question to ask of Rogue Retreat, but I do appreciate your concern. We don't want to duplicate resources. We have a lot of resources that are coming down, both to the city, to the county, and to individuals like AllCare, and to make sure that we're all in a coordinated effort looking at how we can make the best impact that's important.
And it's people with a proven track record that care for the community and do a good job. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Valerie, then Brian, then DJ.
I was just going to clarify a little bit, because I have also talked with Sam Engel and the people, and they don't have the funding at this point. They are in the process of applying for a grant. They need to have something from the city saying that, because at this point currently, they could not put where the motel they're interested in cannot be placed there because of the zoning. So they would have to get a letter from the city showing that we have that, and then they are in line with a lot of other people for the grant, but they are moving in that direction. But I would say that this is just one more piece of the puzzle. I would not say that it precludes anything we're talking about today. I think it's just one piece of the continuum that needs to be built. So that's my...
Brian,
Valerie covered it, thanks.
DJ.
Sure, I have a couple questions about Eugene and how they facilitate their rest stops, particularly providing the land. So it says lands provided by the county, city, and Eugene Mission. Is that an expectation inside of their action plan, or is that just kind of how it's crumbled?
That's kind of how it's just fallen out. That's not an expectation. They're open to other lands if and when they come available, as long as they try to meet as many of those that criteria for finding space. And so it just happened that they did have some inventory in publicly held lands.
Okay, so then the question would be then, out of these 5, the county, city, and Eugene Mission so far have been the contributors as far as available?
They've been the
lands?
primary contributors of land.
Okay, and I'd be interested to know how that's facilitated. You mentioned public land inventory. Has the city or county subsidized purchase of land? And if they have, what kind of funding sources do they have, or how do they procure that money for those things?
No, it's not a purchase of land. It's just land inventory that they have. Just like we have a lot of land inventory, say Allen Creek or whatever it is, we've looked at some of that, and we had a PAVE report on city land. So there's city ownership land in different locations throughout the city. There's county ownership. We haven't ever looked at the county ownership potentially within the city limits or even in the outskirts, maybe in the urban growth boundary. But that's sort of where it came from.
Okay, and then last question about that would be, does the city maintain ownership of those lands?
Yes.
They do. So these are operated on some public lands?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Aaron? Vanessa, then Valerie.
On the map outlining what the zoning for the urban campground possibilities, the 79.5 acres and the 1,187, those are just lands that exist under that zoning. That's not available acres, correct?
Great question, Counselor. You are correct. That is the land, the acreage, not available, but the total acreage.
Thank you.
Valerie?
My question was, do you know, does Eugene currently have small ones in each ward? They said that that's what their goal was.
That was
Does
sort
that
of how they
happen?
wanted to sort of start the program off, but that was the spirit, but that's not how it got implemented. They are
Okay.
still trying to keep it somewhat distributed, but they have not been able to hit every ward.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Aaron? All right,
Thank you, Mayor, Council.
I think in order to provide some order to how we address our guests, let's have Rogue Retreat start us off, please. Chad, if you could come forward and just give us a little bit of an overview about your program. One thing that I noticed that differs is that the Eugene program, they don't stay at the rest stop during the day, and I think that's a little different than what you do.
Absolutely. Do I have to push something?
Yes, I think on the mic, there's a button.
It's live right now.
Is
Thank
it?
you.
Okay. It's just an honor to be here today. I'm really proud of you as a city council, at least taking a look at this, because homelessness is growing all over the country. You know, one of the things that we hear all the time is that if you build it, they'll come, but they're coming everywhere. You know, we have contact with cities all over the state of Oregon that are just trying to figure out what to do with their homeless problem, and it's growing everywhere. Coos Bay, I guess, has just decided to open a campground of their own because they have such a growing population. Lebanon has been down to visit us twice in the last few months because they're trying to know what to do with their problems. Roseburg has actually using us as a consultant to try to figure out what to do there. So homelessness is growing everywhere. And I think you should probably get a chance to talk to Jeff Kirkpatrick here from the Medford Police. We're finding the homeless down there growing as well, even though we now have more opportunities for them than ever before. So I just think it's just what's going on around America in all the cities, and it's good that you guys are getting on top of it as early as you possibly can. We have been really pleasantly surprised how easy our campground has gone since we opened it in July. We believed for years it was a step that we needed to take, but there was always a little fear that once we finally get all these people in one place, how's it going to go? But it has gone extremely well, and it has been very successful. In fact, we're now just talking about maybe extending it again. We're now up to 75 sites, but I think within the next couple of months, we'll probably be up at well over 100 because the need is growing and it's working. And so probably best for me to do is just answer any questions you might have on how it works and how it goes. Oh, I did notice one mistake on a slide, and this one might scare you a little bit. It's not $40,000 a year, it's $40,000 a month that it costs to run the campground. And that comes out to about $23 a day per person. At first, that really freaks you out, but when you take 60 people or more and divide that by 30 days, it comes down to $23 a day per person. Our county jail costs $125 a day per person. So it's a kind of a bargain, and emergency rooms are costing a whole lot more than that. So when we get people off of sleeping out under bushes and in tents, and we get them in a kind of a safe environment, it is much cheaper to take care of the homeless that way.
Just to follow up on that, how is it funded?
Well, there's a lot of ways it gets funded, and you're going to need to talk to Kelly here. Kelly has all the answers when it comes to funding. But we do get a lot of our funding through our action agency down in the Medford area, which is Access, and here in this area it would be UCAN. And they get state funds, and she can explain all that.
Thank you. Any questions for Chad? Joel?
So a potential partner with All Care, looking at some structures for overnight stay. I know in Medford, the campground is located adjacent, I believe, to some other facilities. Is that correct?
The campground is, when you say other facilities, there's a car dealership across the street. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, no, what I was thinking was that you have kind of like one-stop shopping. So like when you provide a motel with some services, that you also have a campground associated with it in a very similar area or close proximity.
We have various sites around Medford at this point. The campground's kind of off by itself, but we do bring a lot of partners to the campground on a daily basis. And Justin Hahn, who is here as our campground manager, is going to explain that a little bit. But we have a wonderful partnership with all kinds of people down there. The Mission brings us food in 5 nights a week. We have the 2 CCOs bring representatives out. We have the county mental health coming out. We have Columbia Care and Options and On Track and the Addiction Recovery Center bringing people out and doing outreach. It's really a community
But it just seems like there'd be some efficiencies in having geographic proximity to each other, by the same management organization.
That would be wonderful if we could all be in one place. As you will discover out here, it's not easy to find properties that you can do that.
They're not at all next to each other, Joel, in Medford. There's 3 separate facilities that are not next to each other.
I wish we could do it that way. We just haven't figured out how to do that. Yeah.
Brian, then DJ.
Thanks for being here, Chad. My first question is, how much land is needed for an urban campground?
That's a great question. Do you guys know exactly how much land we got? Jeff, do you know how big that spot is?
I don't even think that's an acre.
I don't think so.
Maybe an acre.
Maybe an acre, maybe a little.
I think it's like 200 feet deep and maybe 100 feet wide, maybe a little bit longer. So it's not that big a spot.
Okay.
Does that help at all?
Yeah, so
Of course,
maybe
the more
half
land,
an
the
acre
better,
to an
but-
acre, something like that.
Yeah, definitely if you had an acre or even 2, that would be amazing.
Okay, and then also it was brought up with the Eugene program that they're running, and maybe it's the same with you. Children are prohibited from those sites. Is that the same with your programs? And if so, where do the children end up going?
I don't think we actually prohibit them from our campground, but we've just never had a need to have children there. It's not a good spot for children, so we don't even encourage that at all. There's other options for children in the community.
Thanks.
DJ?
Who owns the land that the urban campground
It's
is
a
on?
private landowner that we're on right now, and the city worked out an agreement with that person to be able to have that land.
Was that
and-
land purchased for the use of the urban campground?
What's that now?
Was it purchased for the use of the urban
It's not been
campground?
purchased, it's just being used.
So the
There's-
the person that owns, the private entity that owns the property was sought after having that property and then agreed for it to be utilized for the campground. It wasn't purchased to use
Correct.
for the campground.
Correct.
Okay, let's see. The other question I would have is, what is the direct involvement with the city of Medford in the urban campground? There, we have some, obviously.
I think I'll have Jeff
We have
answer that.
relationships with the public safety. Do they provide funding? Have they adjusted their zoning? Those kind of different things. But before you leave, one more question for you. What's the zoning on the property that the urban campground's on?
I think I looked at it. It's business park industrial.
Okay. So yeah, if whoever's best equipped to answer the question about the direct involvement of the city of Medford.
Let me see if that stays. Mayor and council, it's a pleasure to be here. An absolute honor to be in your beautiful city. So my name's Jeff Kirkpatrick. I'm a sergeant with the Medford Police Department. One of my current duties is that I supervise our livability team, and that was spoken to a little bit by the city manager. To answer your question, as far as zoning, that's not my realm. I'm a cop. So as far as zoning and that stuff goes, I'm not exactly sure. What I can tell you is that the city leased this property from a family that owned, the piece of property that it's on is an old meatpacking property. Hasn't been used in years. It's still got the corrals and the meatpacking facility kind of dilapidated on it. But this particular piece of property was historically a property that our unsheltered homeless population gathered at. And we would continually give them, the code enforcement would give them citations for their weed abatement, for trash abatement, so on and so forth. And the agreement that, my understanding, the agreement the city worked out with them is we will lease this from you and we will abate these code enforcement issues for you. So we took care of the trash and the people that were camping there illegally. And then they implemented, Rogue Retreat was able to implement the campground there.
So just to follow up with that, so the direct involvement, so the city of Medford leases the property, so they fund that lease as well? They pay to have the lease, the city does?
I don't believe, and I don't want to speak out of turn. It is
Sure.
my understanding that they don't pay a lease on that. Their agreement is that they will abate any of the code enforcement issues on the property for the private owner.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
Hey, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate
Very
it. So it's my understanding that Medford PD, in a kind of major way, will say filters out people that they think might be, we'll say, good citizens in a homeless campground situation, and they include them, and they basically can spot those that may not play well with others, so to speak. And I'm just wondering, could you describe a little bit of how you decide kind of who you feel should be invited to a homeless campground, who would be, in your mind, a red flag for somebody to invite, who you guys might tend to want to exclude or steer in a different direction, we'll say, and then what would you do with the people that we'll say are not really good fit for the homeless campground?
That's a very complicated question to answer quickly. But, so when we formed our livability team, this was brand new. This was not something that had really been, I mean, it's been done in some different communities in different ways, but the objectives were some enforcement, some chronic nuisance property stuff, and then resource outreach. And what we found was that in order to make some sort of meaningful impact, we really needed to lean heavy on that resource outreach. And in order to do that, we had to establish relationships with the people that are our clients. We had to establish relationships with the unsheltered houseless community. And that's what our officers do, and they were selected because they're really good at that. They develop relationships with people, and they know them all. We've got 257 camps in the city of Medford as of March 1st, 2021. 257 camps, and we have been in every single one of them. That's what they do. And so in order to make that referral, and we really value our relationship with Rogue Retreat. They're an organization that we identified as someone with a very clear picture in a hand up and not a handout and asking people to take personal responsibility in their own growth. And we don't want to damage that relationship with them. And we care for their staff as well as we care for our own. And so we don't want to put people in that campground that are really going to negatively impact the work that they're trying to do. And so there are definitely some people in our community that will not be good fits for that urban campground. Severe mental health issues, violent mental health issues, that's usually what we're seeing. And with those people, we developed what we call a chronic homeless outreach partnership. And we started working, we casework individuals. Much like you'd casework a chronic nuisance property, you casework an individual and you find the barriers that those people are facing and try to work them through that. We've taken people down to DMV and sat in line with them, bought them ID so that they could go to their bank account, so that they could go. That's just an example, but that's what we do with those hard cases. And sometimes that is a little bit of tough love where you'll put them in jail for 30 days on a municipal court hold for the outstanding cases that they have. And in the meantime, you funnel services to them. You funnel On Track, the addictions recovery, or you funnel mental health services to them. You work with them through the Medford Municipal Court to get these things done. So, and we found some really good progress with that. And then once they're stable, we take them to the campground. So, and we've got a couple of people out there that we have done exactly that with, that spent 30 to 60 days in jail while we funneled services to them, and then now they're at the campground and they're doing wonderful. So they're awesome.
You mentioned that you have specific officers that you feel are kind of more well-suited for that kind of integration, kind of like a school resource officer would be selected as in Grants Pass as somebody who is going to do well with the kids. You guys have officers. So how do they get selected, or do they just gravitate towards it? How do you choose which officers are kind of the most appropriate to interact with the homeless camps?
Well, typically those officers really are easy to identify. You have, I have a soft spot in my heart for police officers in general, but there's definitely that sect of police officer that have a lot of empathy. They're usually a little bit of the more mature police officer. They have a lot of empathy. They understand the big picture, and they're not so narrowly focused. But you're really looking for those folks with the ability to talk to folks and develop relationships and have empathy for the human beings that they're dealing with, and understand the large game. And it's not just, okay, this solution can be solved by putting somebody in jail. There's more to it. Not to say that there's not a need for the latter.
You mentioned the livability team. Can you just explain a little bit more about who that is and what they do?
What happened with that was that our city management, our city council saw a need for a dedicated team of people to deal with some issues that we were seeing in our downtown area and specifically along our greenway. And so they developed this concept of a livability team, and they funded 3 police officers, a community resource officer or a community service officer, non-sworn, kind of like our code enforcement folks. They're non-sworn employees, but ours used to be a cop, didn't like it. Now he's a CSO, does an amazing job. I can't say enough about that guy. But so they funded those positions along with an analyst, a records specialist, to help with the paperwork and the presentations and the putting PowerPoints together, which I am not good at. So thank goodness for her. So they funded that and then put it in our community engagement division, actually created a whole new division and redid some things. So what that team does specifically is that's all they focus on, is just our homeless community. So they are the resource for that homeless community. And what we found, and there's a lot of organizations out there that do things very, very much like that. You'll hear of the Cahoots model in Eugene that go out and they deal with the homeless, or they respond to mental health crisis, they respond to some of these things that you may not need police to respond to. What we found is that if you have the right policeman with the ability to have the stick and the carrot, and you have enforcement behind what you're trying to do, it's a lot more effective. We saw our numbers in camps from September of 2019 to March of 2020 because we developed an app. We go around and we mark each camp, count them, active, inactive, so on and so forth. and we saw our numbers drop significantly. And then COVID hit, and some recent case law came out with some of our courts that made our prohibited camping statute kind of go away. And we haven't enforced prohibited camping since then, since March of 2020, and we went up to 257, like a 70-something% increase since COVID began in March of 2020. So those officers are specifically focused on that large community that we have, and it's a visible community that the 85,000 residents of Medford don't necessarily understand, or that they don't like seeing trash along the freeway as you drive through Medford, and they don't like seeing the camps there, but they don't understand the issues behind it. So that's what that team specifically does, and they try to work people past those barriers. And the urban campground, to kind of tie it back into what we're talking about today, is our first step. Typically. Before the urban campground, it was trying to work through those barriers without a lot of places to go. And now we have an urban campground that we can put them in where there's wraparound services and there's care for them, and we can take them there. One of the things that we run into in some of these court rulings, the Boise case and then the Grants Pass case as well, they talk about you have to have the ability to have housing for these people. If you're going to kick them or remove their tents, or if you're going to take enforcement action upon somebody camping on public property, you have to have somewhere for them to go. And that's one of the things that they constantly are talking about. We have that. We have somewhere for them to go. We have, as of this morning, 6 pallet houses and 9 tent sites available at the urban campground, and I can articulate that in a police report when I say that's why I took enforcement action on this person who was unwilling to go to the campground, because there was options for them. So it's nice to have. And that's what that need from our perspective is.
Thank you. Valerie?
Yeah, thank you for that last statement, because that's, I think, one of the crux of this. Is it actually giving you and allowing you to say, we have an option for you, so if you don't choose that option, then we can do something else. So that's huge for me. One of the things that, just differences between Eugene and whatever is where, in Eugene, they require the people to leave during the day. I'm assuming that does not happen here at the campground, am I correct?
It's Justin or Chad could probably answer that better, but no,
Okay.
they're there during the day.
And is it just kind of from listening to a lot of the services are brought to them, so that because they're in a location that rather than having to find transit and find their way to different places, that a lot of those services are actually provided at the campground, I'm going to assume, because I think that's important. And this particular is not anywhere near like a residential or a school zone. And then my last thing, and I think this is that personal responsibility that you talked about, that I'm assuming that when they're getting their services, they're also trying to life skills and trying to that they are responsible for keeping clean and getting out and doing and helping the community as well. Does that also happen at the campsite?
Yeah, and I can let Justin or Chad answer that question. I can answer the second part that you talked about, and you kind of hit on the not in my backyard that the city councilor, or sorry, sir, the city manager talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. That was a huge issue for us as well. And when we had a city council meeting proposing this, there was a large influx of people that came in, and specifically we have a private school maybe a quarter mile away, mm-hmm. Down there, and they came in and they said, we don't want this. This is going to be terrible for us. I can tell you unequivocally, we have not had an increase in calls for service based on the campground. If we get a calls for service there, it's medical. It's a medical assist. It's a civil situation where they're requesting something. We get very few calls for service as a police department to the campground that require police services. We just don't see it. And I can just say this anecdotally, that the area surrounding that has gotten better as well. Because the campgrounds, the campers that were the illegal campers that were still engaging the destructive behavior aren't there anymore in that particular area, because they've all been referred to the campground. So you see a decrease in that as well.
Thank you. And then just to kind of clarify the
Justin,
day-to-day.
do you want to tell us a little bit about how you run the campground?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councilors, for giving us this opportunity to come out here. So during the day, we have providers that come out to support our individuals. We have mental health. we have employer opportunities, we have treatment providers. So we'll schedule those with the guests, so that way they can utilize those services. We have veteran services. Legal aid was coming out, but it didn't seem like a very utilized service because they're still in survival mode. So all of these services they're able to utilize during the day, you know, because the business hours are 8 to 5, so a lot of the utilized services are only open those hours. So that's why we don't have a time that the guests have to leave. So.
Okay. And a clarification, so you started with 60 on that acre site, it's gone, 75 is grown, is that on that same acre, or, and is there still more space available if you grow more on that acre? I'm just kind of looking at size, of what size property.
So currently, we have 75 sites. So originally, when we first started this, we started with 25 sites.
Okay.
And then we seen that we needed more beds. So then we went to 50, and then we went to 62, and now we're at 75. At this specific site, we could go to 83, but we're not comfortable with going to 83 at this specific site. So there is an opportunity to utilize another space, which we haven't fully established yet, but that opportunity just did come to us. So.
Okay, thank you.
Can you review what some of the rules are at the campground?
So there's 5 basic rules. So there's no theft, no fires, no persistent disruptive behavior, no alcohol and drugs on the property, and no weapons. So it's very low barrier. And if we see somebody intoxicated or we catch somebody with alcohol or substances, we give them the opportunity, you know, to utilize services. And if they choose not to, then they choose not to. So
How is the compliance rate?
the compliance rate,
Yeah, with the rules. Is it something you're having to work daily to enforce?
you know, honestly, you know, with the main rules, no. You know, they're all very basic, and everybody, we have lockers that we have random sorts of weapons that the guests check in. They'll check in their heaters with us and all different kinds of things. So it's very good. You know, we've been able to establish relationships and rapport. For me, I go out on the Greenway on Fridays with our livability team and our law enforcement to build that rapport, build that connection. And I think that's an important piece because a lot of these individuals, you have to, it's a long-term piece. You have to build that trust and engage with them and know that you're going to be there to support them. And that's an important piece that we have in our community is the livability team. So.
Thank you. Rob and then Rick.
Thank you for coming, by the way. You do a great job over there. I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
So I know one of the, just to make a more clear picture for some of the other counselors who might not have been there, so the urban campground has a chain link fence all around it, correct?
Correct.
And if I remember correctly, it's gated and you close the gate at 10 o'clock at night?
We open up the gates at 6 a.m. and lock the gates at 9 p.m.
9 p.m.
But if they're employed, that's different, right? So they'll bring us a work schedule, and then we'll let them in. So we always want our guests to grow, and so if they get employment, we're more than willing to work with them on those gate hours.
So that kind of brings me to, I know that what was kind of pointed out to me when I was in Medford, and it was something that I hadn't really thought about until you guys mentioned it, and it became obvious. One of the biggest obstacles to many of the homeless people getting services, getting Social Security card, food stamps, getting employed, whatever it is having a mailing address.
Correct.
Because without that, I mean, I'm an employer. I wouldn't hire somebody who didn't have a mailing address. But I'm just wondering, because I don't remember, do you guys, do they have a mailing address once they're in the homeless campground, or do you have to wait till they get into a shelter to get a mailing address?
So we have our main office address, the 711 East Main, that our guests are able to utilize. Plus, anybody in our community can utilize that address to receive mail at.
So I had one more question. I don't know if it was more appropriate for you or Chad, but I'll just ask it. So, and you may have seen in the presentation, our current industrial land is fairly small and it's pretty spread out. I'm just wondering, how important do you feel having a more central location for a homeless campground is compared to having it, you know, off at the outskirts of town? I know, I think you guys have buses that come and drive some of the residents to showers once a week or twice a week, whatever, but how important do you feel it is to try to get a more central location, something that's near a supermarket or walking distance to certain things?
Well, I think central location is an important piece, right? But you always want to take in the factor of your community and what their thoughts are on it, you know? So for us, we have a significant location that is perfect, right? We have a car dealership, and then an RV place that we're in between, you know, and there's one house. So it's ideal for us, and 2 blocks down is a bus route that they can utilize. But for us, all the resources come to us, so they don't have to go utilize services throughout town. They come straight to us, so.
So if I remember correctly, the residents there are bused to places where they can take showers a couple times a week. I'm just wondering why you don't have just a shower trailer right on site right there, because that would, I guess, basically you wouldn't even need to have the service come to you then. You'd have a shower right there. How did you make that decision to take them off site for showers?
So currently we have to take them off site because our current facility does not have running water. So all of the water we're having to get either donated or having to buy. So we're buying numerous bottles of water. So that's why we transport them to the shower units and laundry units Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then if they choose to, they can go on Friday themselves. But we transport them on Tuesdays and Thursdays through our shuttles to where they're able to utilize those things. So, yeah.
Rick?
So, thank you for coming. In the presentation, you say served 377 people and 133 have been successful in transitioning forward. Now, the average stay is about 10 months. So, of those people that are successful, they've moved into apartments and gotten jobs and so forth, I expect?
So it just depends on the individual. So let's say that they're a veteran, right? So right now, we have a 99% success rate getting our veterans into long-term housing.
Ooh.
So veteran services are a lot more easy to utilize once they have a home base. So what our experience is they go and they try to engage an individual that's houseless or homeless, and they can't find them the next day, you know. But with the model that we've created, they have a home base to where they're able to find the individual and support them into getting them into long-term services. Others have gone through reunification, say Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee. We've been able to get them bus tickets to get back to their family. Some have gotten their unemployment back to where they've been able to buy a fifth wheel or an RV to put on a piece of property. Some have went to our Kelly shelter. Some have went to the Gospel Mission, and some have gotten their own long-term housing. So, but the numbers could be way different, right? So a lot of these guys and gals, they self-exit. So what we've started doing recently is if we have a contact number, we'll follow up with them. And through that, we've been able to add these individuals to our list saying that they bought a trailer or got an apartment. So when they self-exit, we don't know. But those numbers have changed. So right now we have currently helped 396 throughout since July. 140 have transitioned forward, and currently we have 66 residing there at the campground right now. So,
And those individuals that are not successful, have they fallen back into drugs or alcohol and then they're told to leave, or what happens to them in general?
so the ones that we find and that we're able to monitor where they go, I would say probably 8% come back through services, but the rest we don't see again, you know. Yeah, so.
Vanessa?
Thank you for coming today. When I toured the urban campground last year, I was really impressed with the community support that comes together to make the program possible. Can you talk a little bit about that? How folks receive showers, laundry, where the propane comes from, water donations, that type of stuff?
I'm glad you brought that up. So this whole thing would not exist without the community support. We have a great support from our law enforcement team, the livability team, and the Sheriff's Department, as well as we have a major significant support throughout our community. So Southern Oregon Goodwill, they provide our propane for our heaters at no cost. It's all donated. Our sleeping bags are provided by them, so they donate them to us to where we can keep these individuals warmer, you know, in their tents. St. Vincent de Paul has bought us a generator, and they've been buying pallets of water. They bought a significant amount of our big long canopies, as well as they donated tents. We've reached out to our local tree companies, and they've been donating bark, as well as our Parks Department. Anytime they do a tree job or something like that, they'll mulch up the tree, and we'll get that bark to be able to spread across the ground where we're camping. There are so many community partners that makes this flourish. I don't even think I can mention them all, you know, but it is through community collaboration that this is going to be able to be long-term successful. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
So Justin, one of the things that I've been hearing from members of the community is that homeless people are lazy and that they will take as many services as we provide and that we shouldn't enable them. What is your take on that?
I would say that a high majority of them are not lazy. There are those few, but I think that some of the individuals haven't found the right support and guide them into those services. You know, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced resource shopping, so sometimes it can be significantly challenging. You know, you'll go to one agency to utilize a service, and then you'll have to go to another way across town, and then that one will tell you to go way across town over there, you know, to get the other piece. You know, if you're houseless, that's going to wear you out. You know, that's just going to decrease your morale, your overall spirit, and all that. You know, what we have created here is a centralized service to where all those entities are able to come and they're able to utilize them, whether they need a birth certificate, they need ID, they want to reunify with family, they want to get employed, they want to get food stamps, you know, they want to get clothing, they want to get employed, all those different pieces we have brought here, you know, to our campground. You know, we have the mental health providers that come out. We have two different ones. We have the mental health team, the crisis team, as well as options. So they come out separately. And then we have the treatment providers that come out separately, ARC and On Track. So, I mean, each individual is different on their own level, you know, so you got to address each individual separately. Nobody is the same. They're all unique in their own way. So it's back to what I said a few minutes ago, is building that rapport, building those relationships, and getting to know these individuals and figuring out what their barriers are. So.
Thank you.
You're
The other thing that we've heard is that if you build it, they will come. Do you keep any sort of statistics on where your guests are from? Are they from Jackson County or are they coming from some other place? And I see Chad pointing. Okay, sure.
I'll reroute to Jeff. Thank you. Do you have any more questions?
That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm back. You thought you were going to get rid of me. So that was one of the questions that we were having too, because we kind of anecdotally, without evidence-based anything, we were seeing like, I don't know you. And like I had alluded to earlier, we know most of the people that we serve down, at least on our greenway in our downtown area. And we were running into a large amount of people who were like, we don't know you. Where are you from? And it varies. It's not like everybody's from California, everybody's from Grants Pass, they're all over. It's Vermont, Montana, Tennessee, they're from all over. And a lot of what we run into, a large percentage of the folks we run into like moved here for the marijuana industry. And then there's no job when they get here. They thought they had one, and that's a large percentage. And so when we did our encampment survey in early March, we simply added a section where we could just ask the question, have you been in the Medford area less than 6 months, yes or no? And that was just, and we typically don't even count people when we do that. It's typically we're just counting encampments. So we're trying to keep the person data away. We're trying to keep away from the person data in those things. We're just trying to count encampments. And what we found was that about 30% the people that we actually had contact with on those 2 particular days. And we contacted like 110 people. A lot of people weren't in their camps when we went through, but we'd simply ask that question. We were getting about 30% of our respondents were from out of the area for less than 6 months. So we are having a large influx, but I don't think that is just a Southern Oregon, Grants Pass, Medford issue. You go anywhere and homelessness is on the rise. I mean, it's very apparent as you drive through Portland, as you drive through the majority of the cities along Interstate 5 in the 3 western states, that homelessness is going up. And we're seeing it, and I think that as a result, I won't even get into the fires, because the fires in Jackson County, we don't see a lot of, there's services for those folks. These aren't fire-related issues so much. I think it's just more of an issue overall. But we are seeing an increase in people coming here who are homeless. We're definitely seeing an increase in that. And I don't have the answer for why that is. I don't.
Did you say that
I'm just a cop.
30% are from out of the area?
30% of the people that we talked to out of the 110 that we contacted in that 2-day period
Okay.
and asked that particular question to had been here less than 6 months.
So 70% had been here more
Correct.
than 6
But I don't know where that number lies if you talk to every single homeless person in the city of Medford.
Rob?
Can you speak to, Sarah touched on, some of the, we'll say, biases that the majority of residents might have towards homeless, whether they're lazy or not lazy or whatever. Can you speak to any of the concerns or the lack of trust that the homeless may have had when, a cop goes and says, oh, we got something better for you, come with us? I mean, I would imagine that some of them would say, what's, probably thought it was a scam.
Right.
So can you speak to any of that, or?
Yeah, that's a reality. And that's when I spoke earlier, you have to develop that trust, and Justin hit on it as well. You have to develop that trust. And the relationship's not something that you do in a 10-minute conversation one time. It's daily. It's daily. How are you? Checking in with them. What can I do for you? And eventually, some of them they get to the point where they trust you, and you're able to actually break down some of those barriers. Some of them never really get to that point where you develop that trust. And that's I talked earlier. That's, from my perspective, that's why enforcement is necessary in certain circumstances. And we use enforcement significantly less than we use outreach, at least in what we do from the livability team standpoint.
DJ has a question he's been waiting on for a bit, and then Vanessa and Joel.
So the answer to this is clearly going to be anecdotal, but can you speak to the impacts of homelessness and crimes related in regards to the presence of an urban campground in Medford?
In regards to with the urban campground, like I said earlier, I don't see an increase in criminal behavior as a result of an urban campground. If anything, it would go down because you're putting people in a safe space where they're not committing the crime that you're seeing down on the Greenway. And a lot of the crime that happens in the homeless population happens in our homeless population, and a lot of that's not reported. There's a lot of that happens, and yes, anecdotally, but I would say that our homeless population is a large portion of the crime that occurs within the city of Medford. I think that there is a portion of that. I don't know the percentage-wise, though.
Sure. So rather than just supposing what might happen, have you noticed an impact in the community in relation to social services?
It's difficult because you have two things working against with COVID and a shelter in place along the Greenway where our health authorities said the best thing for the homeless population to do is to shelter in place, and then there's no enforcement because during a pandemic we're saying, no, we want you to stay here, and then that community is going up, but at the same time we're actually adding people to the urban campground. It's a difficult question to answer, and I don't know that I could accurately answer that.
Vanessa?
Thank you for coming today. For my own curiosity, can you define an encampment? Is that just one tent, or is that a grouping?
I can. Our city council is voting Thursday night on a camping ordinance, and that ordinance actually defines an encampment. Campsite means any place where any stove or fire is placed, established, or maintained for the purpose of maintaining a temporary place to live, where the use of any tent, lean-to, shack, or any other structure or any vehicle or part of is placed, established, or maintained for the purpose of maintaining a temporary place to live. That's how we are defining a campsite.
Thank you. And also, can you talk to any experiences that MPD may have with the reduction in contacts to their frequent flyers who may have entered the urban campground program?
We don't have a lot of contact with the folks, I mean, very little contact with the folks that have successfully transferred out of their own from the urban campground, the 100 and some odd that Justin mentioned that had transferred a step forward. There is continual contact with the folks who self-exit because of behavioral issues, the ability to not cope very well in that setting. And that continual contact from us is usually self-initiated in the fact that we're trying to maintain that relationship and then get them back in there. So there is a large amount of contact with those folks that do self-exit from the campground under bad circumstances.
My question is, are there any experiences with John Doe who may have had a lot of calls? He's hanging out downtown, a lot of calls to MPD. He enters the program. He's able to successfully transition. Of course, there's a reduction in calls for service for that individual, relieving MPD from having to respond to that. Do you have any experience with that?
A lot, yeah. There's a lot of those people that we've dealt with, and we've told stories about them, and we've had a lot of folks that we've successfully done that with. And then it's not just an impact on MPD and the calls for service, but the amount of times that our Mercy flights or our fire department has to go on a medical call with these people has reduced. The amount of hospital trips and the ER beds that they're taking up have reduced. But we have a lot of stories of those folks that, and then sometimes we swing the bat and we miss. And that person falls right back into their old behavior after 6 months. I'm making, think of a couple people right off the top of my head that we were like, solved it, nailed it. And then a month later, they self-exit from the campground and we find them drinking in an alley downtown. And you're like, what happened? You got to work through the whole thing again. And that's just, it's part of the process. It's the nature of that behavior.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Joel?
Well, thank you for being here. It's very informative. I'm looking at the future, 5, 10 years from now. If we extrapolate the trend from 5 years ago to now, the future is going to look a lot different than what it does today. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, the stochastic response of that. So I'm asking you my worst fear, which rarely happens, but with the change in heroin and meth accountability laws here in Oregon, as that gets to the nation, our climate, that's, being from Iowa, they don't have a homeless problem back there in the wintertime because you'd freeze to death at 30 below. And so when I talk to people back there, they really don't understand it because they don't see any. Because you have to stay inside to stay alive. With our climate, it's a little different, especially in the summertime, it's so nice. So what do you see the future trend? Like you say, you've increased the capacity over the last year. Our problem is, or our, whatever you want to call it, the change in demographics and housing prices, affordability, pandemic, jobs, drug laws being changed, hopefully for the better, but it's not uniform across the nation. So people would want to go where they think it's best for what they have decided to do. What does the future look like for Grants Pass 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now?
Yeah, and it's difficult for me to answer that question on a personal level because when I put a uniform on, I typically don't give my personal opinion. But as a resident of the city of Medford, and I grew up there and went to high school there, and I've been in public service there for nearly 20 years, it scares me. That's where I come from, is if we don't address, and it's the issues that we've talked about today with an urban campground is not the solve-all for homelessness. There are so many things, and you alluded to them, there's so many things that play into that particular issue, and sometimes you're trying to put a Band-Aid on it and find a fix so that it's good for your community. But we do see it here more than we're going to see it in other places. I mean, Grants Pass, it's the climate, right? That it's pretty temperate. Relatively. I mean, our bad day here is 25 degrees on a really, really, really cold day. And then a hot day is, in the 90s, and that's livable. So it's not like Iowa or Illinois or some of these other places. So that is something that that's a difficult question to answer, and I think that there's a lot of things at play that are going to contribute to the increase or our ability to decrease the unsheltered populations in our community.
Thank you. Rick?
So for those people that have been living in cars, and if they were eligible to go into a campground, do you have parking spaces where they can park their cars, or how does that work?
That's a great question. No, not currently. Currently there's not the ability with our current location. There's not an ability to park cars out there. In fact, we've run into some issues with some folks that with cars parked on the particular street right in front of the urban campground because it's a no parking area, but yet you have to have the ability for staff and service members and so on and so forth to be there. We need to work through an issue with car camping, because car camping is an issue, because there's a lot of people who are unsheltered living in their cars. And that's something that has to be addressed, or something that we at least have to look at in the future and how we're going to deal with that.
Brian?
Yeah, my question might be more for Chad. I was wondering, just to follow up with that, if he has any thoughts on the car camping piece of this problem.
I can't, before I relinquish it to him, I will say that during the onset of the pandemic back in March, April of 2020, the city did take some property in the city of Medford downtown next to Les Schwab, and it was city-owned property, and they did, through another organization, not through Rogue Retreat, but through another organization, had them kind of manage this area where we could let people camp because of the pandemic scare, trying to shelter in place and you're not spread through the community. We did try that. I do know that one of the things, the issue there is that you have to choose the right provider to manage those services.
And how did that go?
It went okay, but it ended up falling onto the police department to really regulate the behavior that was happening there and who was there. So,
okay.
I'll let Chad answer that part of it.
So, back to your question.
I was just following up with Rick's question about how people living out of their cars, if Rogue Retreat has given any thought to that piece of this puzzle.
We talk about it all the time. Just on my drive up here, I was talking to Liz, who's our operations director, and Justin. I said, as we expand this campground, we've got to find a way to get some car camping spots because it's growing. Just down the street from where I live, I take a walk every morning. There's a BMW, and every morning I walk by it, there's somebody sleeping in it. A BMW. So what's the situation behind that? I don't know, but I know that what happens is somebody loses a job for whatever reason, they lose their home, and then they have their car. And then eventually they'll lose their car, but that's what they have until they lose it, and that's what they're sleeping in. Can I respond back, though, to Mayor, your question earlier about, are we just enabling people? And I think the common person in the community doesn't realize that we're already taking care of the homeless if we don't take care of the homeless. Financially, we are taking care of the homeless. By just leaving them on the streets, it's costing our communities a lot of money. And it's actually far cheaper to get them off the streets into some kind of an organized situation like an urban campground, and I know Kelly can respond to that too, that it just behooves us as an organization, as a community, to get people off the streets. And there are going to be that percentage that Justin referred to that are not going to want to do anything, that are just lazy. There's that 20% or whatever it is. But you're still paying for them if you don't get them off the streets. And if we get them off the streets, we have a better chance at maybe getting through to them to make some changes.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I actually had another question for the sergeant, and it was around their enforcement of the camping ordinances pre-COVID versus after COVID hit and how that changed. Because you did touch on that briefly. I just was wondering if maybe you could give a little bit more detail about how that changed for you guys.
Yeah, so our direction from our city attorney's office during the pandemic was to hold off on any prohibited camping enforcement because they declared a public safety emergency and asked people to shelter in place. And so we haven't used our prohibited camping ordinance. And much like any prohibited camping ordinances that for the majority of the cities under the Ninth Circuit Court's jurisdiction, the Boise case really changed the kind of how those things go. So our prohibited camping ordinance used to be a crime to camp, then the city of Medford on public land, then that switched, became a violation, and was no longer arrestable and was a simple citation. But we now our city council or our city attorney's office has poured through and sat through months worth of meetings, the League of Oregon Cities and some other things, and are trying to figure out the best way to word a new ordinance, and they've come up with that. They're voting on it Thursday night, but that ordinance, if it's passed, it's on the heels of the fire that devastated our greenway and devastated two cities just south of Medford and was really close to entering the city itself. And so on the heels of that, some serious safety concerns with our greenway and fire safety. And so they rewrote that ordinance, and it's going to be, if it passes, it will be a crime to have a tent on the greenway or to sleep on the greenway with or without a tent during fire season, May 1st to September 30th. And then it will be a violation to sleep on a sidewalk in front of a business where you're restricting pedestrian traffic into businesses or down the sidewalk and so on and so forth. But we haven't done any enforcement of prohibited camping since then, but that may very well change in the next couple weeks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Rick?
So it sounds like you've been very successful in putting together this team that oversees the different aspects of the homeless operation. When you put that team together, did you have to advertise, or the people just came out naturally? I realized they had different abilities and sound like you've been real successful in their talents and their passion, but did you have to advertise or have difficulty putting that team together, or how did it occur?
No, there wasn't a difficulty in selecting the people. There was no advertisement because it's all internal. These are people that have been cops for a long time with varying backgrounds and different things that they've done throughout their careers. And I think that our youngest police officer's been there 12 to 13 is on our team. The majority of them have been cops in the 15-year to 20-year range. But just like anything with most police agencies, there was a selection process where everybody put their name in the hat, and then we held interviews. And this is what we're looking for. And then it's a rotational thing, so they're supposed to be there for 2 years. We're actually going to extend a couple of them because of COVID and because of this new ordinance coming into place. We want experienced people to. We are going to get sued over this ordinance. That will happen. They've already said that, and it hasn't even been passed. So we want experienced people doing this correctly when we start to enforce this ordinance.
And as far as the funding for the policemen that are on the team, is that funded by the city council, or does that have outside funding as well?
That was an additional funding added by the city council to the police department's budget, it's my understanding.
Valerie, then Rob?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this question is for you, but I'm just going to throw it out to whoever can answer it. You talked about that one of the most difficult parts was finding locations for this particular thing. And we all know that, the NIMBY and that sort of thing. Are there any like tax incentives or that are involved in it, or did you do some sort of community outreach in the areas to try to have people step forward to volunteer some land, or how does that work?
Do you want me to answer that, Chad? So this particular property, the owners of this property own multiple properties throughout the city of Medford.
Okay.
And we have a little bit of a relationship with the owners of that property who own some downtown businesses, so on and so forth. And we'd been in constant communication with them over this particular property and the nuisance abatements that we've been trying to get them to accomplish, the weed abatements and the trash abatements so it kind of fell into place that way. I don't believe that there's any kind of tax incentives on that. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what incentives they get other than the fact that we take care of their abatements for them.
Okay.
And our Parks Department will go out and cut their weeds, and we'll take care of the trash of the people doing it on there. So that's really the benefit for that particular landowner.
Rob?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that I'm really, really impressed with the ability and willingness of Medford City Hall and the Police Department and Rogue Retreat to work together on this, because it's, you guys would probably laugh if I called you a finely oiled machine, but from the outside looking in, you guys are way closer to being a finely oiled machine than Grants Pass is at this time. So, it's a really good model, and it's a really good example that you're setting, working together for everybody's benefit. And I guess maybe the take-home message that I'm getting is that it would seem as though that the number one thing that all of you are working towards, or that Grants Pass could provide for our homeless community, the number one thing would be stability, so that someone knows where they're living, where their tent's going to be, where they can potentially reach out for help. But stability seems to be number one. And once they have that, then there's a chance that they have a good outcome in their life. I mean, is that a reasonable statement?
That is reasonable. Yeah, I think that developing the relationships with the people that you're serving and providing that stability is really the stepping stone for getting them on the path to recovery, whatever that recovery is, maybe not just drug abuse, but mental health or simple life decisions. And thank you. Most of the credit really needs to go to the leadership of Rogue Retreat. Without that partnership, none of this happens. The livability team would be a lot less effective without that partner. So.
Thank you. We need to start moving towards wrapping up this discussion, but I know Kelly Wessels from UCAN is here, and so I wanted to ask you, Kelly, first of all, do we have a need for this type of facility in Grants Pass? How we might go about funding this type of facility in Grants Pass, and then just whether you have any other thoughts to share with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm Kelly Wessels. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for UCAN. Rogue Retreat is a partner of ours and a well-suited partner for this type of operation. I just want to put that out there because I think it's really important that someone such as myself, I have worked in this community for over 25 years now. I would not sacrifice my credibility or my integrity for anyone. Just putting it out there, because I've worked too hard in an industry that isn't often appreciated in the way that we would consider. It's just the way it is. And we do a lot of unspoken things to help this community. But in this particular case, even in the winter shelter idea that was bubbling for the 4-month period of time, I had already allocated over $100,000 for their operation. Right now, that money's sitting unspent. There is an awful lot of funding that has come down from the state of Oregon through Oregon Housing and Community Services. I think something else to be considerate of is that House Bill 2004 and 2006 are directly related to funding definitions, expansion of shelter. Some of the things that I think that are important today, we've talked a lot about Medford. Let's talk about Grants Pass as it sits right now. Because one of the things that makes that work so well is that you're starting to see those bits and pieces of a continuum. A continuum stretches all the way from over here where unhoused, unsheltered, unanything existence to the highest peak of home ownership, free and clear, okay? That's a continuum. There are so many spaces in between that. There are so many things that need to happen. We don't have low barrier shelter. They have at least 2. All right? They have different resources in their community that they have worked hard for and that Rogue Retreat and other partners have developed over time that we don't have here. So when you speak to the idea of duplication or competing interest, I would like to really make a point of saying, you got to have something to compete with first. And so I think it's really important that we look at it that way. Not all means fit all people. I am encouraged highly by the discussions and the diversity of discussion as far as the different options. Car camping, just so you are aware, in our community is very large. That is the homeless you don't necessarily see. The homeless that you're seeing at Riverside Park or in pockets of this community are the smallest proportion of our homeless community. Just want to put that out there. Our annual pit count for the last 5 to 7 years has bounced between about 1,200 and 1,400 individuals. Okay? Not a lot of deviation in that over 5 to 7 years. And we do, and other than the COVID impacted count this year, we have done a sheltered and unsheltered count, all right? We are officially labeled part of the continuum of care under HUD. We are part of what's called the balance of state. So we keep that data. We watch that data. And we record it and make sure that it's being consistent. And Southern Oregon, in that particular case, has about 46% of the homeless that you're talking about in that number. 46%, and this is validated by the both school districts, are 18 and under. So your car camping is significant. Your unstably housed is significant. I wanted to address one thing as well as far as cost per day, because I think this is important. $23, $24 a day. Right now, if I have to put somebody in motel shelter, which I do, costs at minimum $125 a day. When there is no housing inventory, and I have a household that is medically fragile, or has some other reason, third-party verification that must occur, and we have no other shelter options, that's costing me between $125 and $175 a day, and likely going to go on for at least 6 weeks, at minimum. I need to point out how incredibly inefficient funding use is when you look at that, when you could be doing it so much better. Are some of the things that you talk about resources coming on board, we've been mobilizing for years in this community, being first responders. Currently during COVID, my agency and others are actually the ones that have been on the street the whole time, working with these individuals, when other human service providers were unable to do so. So I think that mobilization and that integration is something that is very natural to our community and something that I actually feel very proud of. It is incredibly important to note that even under the ORSs of 203.077 and 079, which have to do with responding to unlawful campsites and the protocols that go along with that we work in conjunction with the law enforcement locally, they contact us prior to, when they find someone that they're at a campsite they're going to post. They contact us, and we do outreach. That is an incredibly great gift. Not all communities do that well. It's on the books to do it, but not all do it well. This community has done that well. I happen to work both Josephine and Douglas County, so I have the opportunity, and I can affirm what Rogue Retreat is, we're working on in Douglas County as well. But I just think that those are some really important filler pieces that bring the reality back to what our community is going to be facing. Because this will be a first step, but it can't be the only step. It has to be a series of steps. It has to be a community step. And I really would like to see the county involved in this as well. I've had conversations with Representative Morgan about it as well. We have to be, it's not just one entity's issue. And lastly, the one thing I feel like is missing in this conversation, if you'll permit me to say so, is that we have no one of lived experience involved in this discussion. We're talking about them, but we're not involving them in this discussion. And I'm not quite sure how to successfully do that well, but I think that you don't have solutions on a problem without including the people that are affected by it.
Thank you. On that note, I have a question for any of you who want to answer, but what does an ideal location for a campground look like in your perspective?
Well, ideally, you like to be close to services and things like that. However, one thing that I think is important is that it be something that has privacy for both parties. And I'm speaking for myself, for the population I serve. I believe that it is not just about, me not seeing them, but, guess what? Some people don't want to be seen. They would like some personal privacy too. It was spoken to before. People who are living in these environments are working. They get off work, they want a safe space to take a nap, to eat their dinner, and not be on display. So I think that a part of that is really important, and I think that in our community, we could be very successful in it as far as transportation and coordination of those kinds of things. So I like the sense that there's a bit of respect and privacy for people that oftentimes doesn't come along these type of activities.
Thank you. Rick, Rob, Vanessa, Joel.
Thank you, Kelly. As you know, the city of Grants Pass has some very tight funding, and we're going for a recent new levy here, a renewal. Does UCAN have funds available to help supplement the police department for this type of purpose?
Supplementing the police department? Probably not. I would find that to be an interesting, I think that we would be able to contribute staffing to the responding, no different than what you do with options in your crisis response teams. But I think that what we can do is we can alleviate costs from other areas. And I also think that it's important to look at what funding fits in the best places, because you've got community development block grant funds that can be used for certain things. You've got funds that I have, which are state funds, federal funds, community service block grant funds. All of those things are available. Continuum of care funds through HUD. You have all of that. Then you have Medicaid funds that can come into this. And Medicaid funds would flow through traditionally your CCOs. So there's a lot of funding that's out there that's going to take care of a lot of the circumstances around this.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. You bring up a lot of great points, especially about it being a continuum. And that was one of the points that was really driven home for me when I went and visited Medford. And I'd also like to say that, well, it's true that them, as you say, are not represented here in this room. I'd just like to remind everybody that I have reminded city staff, Aaron Kubik and his staff, and other counselors who have not visited in Medford, that's where I actually was able to be exposed to success stories and people who have started out with one little increment 14 years ago. And, speaking with Billy and speaking with Rowena, and those success stories are just absolutely heart-wrenching, and it's amazing to communicate with those people and see exactly, and they have so much street cred, with the people that they are overseeing, because they've lived it, they know it. And I would encourage still everybody in this room who has not seen the Rogue Retreat facilities in Medford, I would visit all of them, especially city staff, especially Aaron Kubik and the rest of his staff, and especially the counselors who haven't been there yet, because it really is a real eye-opener when you really understand how low somebody has been and where they are now, and this is the kind of program that got them there one little increment at a time. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you, and just let me say that I should be very careful to not be so presumptuous to know somebody else's story in this room. There are different experiences that people have, so I don't want to be that presumptuous, but I do want to be respectful that people should be involved.
Vanessa, then Joel.
I think it's a very valuable point to say that unhoused voices are always absent from these conversations, because they are. When you are trying to find somewhere to sleep and a hot meal to eat that day, you're not going to have the concern of showing up to a city council meeting or writing an email. So I think that's very valuable. Thank you. I'd like you to further elaborate on what a city, county, or statewide partnership could look like.
Well, I think first of all is when you're looking at a location. I mean, there's multiple ways to do this, and there's also locations that could be looked at. We're geographically a really interesting community, and so not all things are best for the people, will be City of Grants Pass. Maybe Cave Junction has an option that might be different. Maybe safe parking operation would work better out there. I happen to live in Merlin. I happen to know that it's very clear that there are certain pockets of veteran homelessness in that area that have to be handled differently than what I would do in town. So there is a characteristic of unsheltered individuals and trying to find the right mix for the right environment. So that type of partnership really is a coalition that needs to work this problem on a regular basis. We do not have a commission that of actual municipal effort to focus on this issue. And I do want to step back, and in case you don't know, about 5 years ago, Eugene was in the same space. They actually, Jefferson Public Radio, you can go back and research the archives, talk about the fact that Eugene, several years ago, couldn't enforce certain things on their books because they had never done any of the things that they said they were going to do in their previous planning. So they had to take a step back and go, okay, what did we say we were going to do? Who was supposed to be a part of that? And then move it forward. And I think that that was really an interesting space for someone to bring that humility to the table, but also to say, let's do something about it. And it didn't make overpromise, but currently they've got one of the best models.
Joel?
Well, again, Kelly, thank you for being here. I appreciate you and honor you for what you've done. One of the things that you said struck an accord with me was everybody has a voice and everybody has a story. And Eugene, I know what they did was they gave those people that others would stereotype as being homeless a voice, especially with the police department before they had good relationships. And it turned things around. So I'd just like to reinforce what you said there, that everybody has a voice in a democracy. The other thing I was looking at was history. This isn't the first time this has happened to us as a country. So back in the Depression, we had this, and there was no Social Security, there was no food stamps, there was no Medicare. I mean, the social safety nets were non-existent. And it was not, I didn't live there during that time, obviously, but I can imagine it wasn't a fun time for a lot of people. One of the things they did, they turned the demographics into a positive thing. And, you know, I worked with the U.S. Forest Service for 35 years. And you look at the icons of the Cascades with the Forest Service, even with the Park Service, Crater Lake Lodge, the inn up there, Mount Hood, Timberline Lodge, Diamond Lake, Oregon Caves. The people that were taught a trade like plumbing and electricity that we don't have a lot of today. And a lot of them came from the East Coast. And they were put up in places like Union Creek, Timberline Lodge, and places like that. Do you see in the future any attempt to make these demographics from a disadvantage into an advantage for our future?
Well, I think first of all, if you can be in the same space on a regular basis, we can work with people to be able to get into those kinds of programs. If you can't find them or you're always in survival mode and you're moving throughout the clock of a houseless individual, our success rate is not going to be good. I think that there's programs out there, there's funding out there, COVID packages for the next 3 to 5 years, I have no doubt, will have a great deal of inclusion on recovery. But you can't plan recovery financially or otherwise if you don't have a stable place to be. You brought up mail. That's a huge piece. ID. House Bill 2037 deals with us being able to deal with homeless individuals so we can provide them, the DMV will not charge them every time that they lose the ID because oftentimes that's due to theft within their own culture. Mm-hmm. So the fact is that there's some things out there that will definitely help. And I think that the starting step, though, is that stability. You know, you wouldn't hire somebody without an address. Those people need a space to be. And by the way, statistically in our community, from our data, 20 to 25% of your fast food industry are homeless. That's working right now. So those are the same people that don't have a place to be, but who are serving us our meals because we can't dine other places or because we're on the run. I think that's pretty important that we give back a little bit of courtesy and stability to our community. It also, the cost savings is important. I also looked at one other thing that I thought was important, and some of the other aspects that Chad is looking at for support to this campground, propane. That's a great one, right? That is something that falls under the energy assistance side of my agency. So there's I can do some unusual things that are not necessarily hygiene kits or case management or those things that are very traditional. We've got other resources that can be invested, and the tighter the partnership, the more efficient the cost of the operation. So think in terms of right now, the money that we waste doing it inefficiently because it still has to get done. I'm really hopeful that I can have an economy of effort for my own operation because it's exhausting to do it the hard way.
Rick and then Valerie.
So Kelly, I like your comments about working with the county together and so forth. And I don't know if you'd be able to answer this question. Is there the potential for the city to coordinate with the county and actually have a campground that's located in the county? Or does our campground have to be within city limits? Do you know?
I would love to explore that. That would be something very exciting for me. I can't speak to it specifically.
Thank you.
Valerie?
Yes, I would just like to add that this has been a journey. It has. And I can tell you, I have worked specifically with many of these people in this room for years, not months, but years to try to get this. And I think that, 2 years ago, and the city hosted Come Together. We know this is a problem. It was 2 years ago. And we started getting it going and running and what the missing piece at that point was Rogue Retreat, because we didn't have a nonprofit that was able to step forward who had a track record. And so now I just feel like everything's in place. We've got the pieces in place. We do have a community out there. I can tell you people that are standing in line that are wondering, why can't I volunteer? Why can't I do something? Because what's going on in our town? So it's there. We know there's a need. I will say, I can say I know Kelly has worked her fanny off in this community just over the years to make things happen. And so I think Kelly's UCAN connection, which is the access connection that happens over in Medford, that's exactly the same thing. And so to have the access in the community of Medford, who is larger and has worked out the bugs, be able to step into our community to help us, this is exactly, and we are ripe right now to make it happen. So I'm very excited about it. And at this point, I agree, we need to get the county on board. We need to. We need to get the county. We are in the county. We're part of the county. So we just need to make it happen. This is our chance. We've got all the pieces that we need to have. So let's do it.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, Valerie, I agree with everything you just said, and I appreciate any groundwork you've done in the last few years. Speaking with Chad a while back, his observation of Grants Pass was that the worst thing that we could do right now is nothing. That would be the worst thing, and I would have to agree, because we've got people, and it doesn't matter, and I was discussing this with Aaron the other day, it doesn't really matter whether it's people who hate the homeless, and on the council, we all know there's some of them, we get some emails. There's people who just hate seeing the homeless, but want to see them get help. There's people who want to actively volunteer to help. And then, of course, there's some people that even invite them into their homes. So we've got a broad spectrum of views towards the homeless. But no matter what your view is on the homeless, right now, what's happening in Grants Pass just sucks. I mean, we're not doing anything right now. And it doesn't matter what your view on it is, it's not getting better currently. We're in the process of that discussion, moving in that direction. But when we're talking about lawsuits that might be 4 or 5 years out, we can't afford to do nothing for the next 4 or 5 years. We're right on the cusp right now. And I'd like to just read a very brief letter from the Chief of Police from Medford. It says, I've been very pleased with the operation of the shelter and urban campground in Medford. These are not easy accomplishments, and Rogue Retreat has stepped up to the task. Rogue Retreat listened to the city, and especially the police department in the beginning. And after a rough start, they have improved every year and now run a model program that has a low impact on their neighbors. They also have very low crime stats and call for service at each of their locations. This is an impressive considering the mix of the clientele. I can go into further detail if you wish, but I've already provided a lot of data to Chief Warren Hensman on this topic, so I don't want to be redundant. And that's signed Scott Clausen, the Chief of Police in Medford. So, I think that we really, everybody in the room here today that came to speak and really help us, I'm really grateful that you guys are here, because, you have the experience, and it was just wonderful actually hearing what it took and what it continues to take on a minute-by-minute basis, the dedication that you all have to making this right. And hopefully we can start embodying some of that in Grants Pass as well. And thank you.
Thank you. I think, does anybody have any burning questions, or are we kind of moving into a discussion phase? Do we have any final questions? No. Okay. Well, I want to thank our guests very much for being here. We appreciate all the information. As far as next steps, where do we want to take this, everybody? So thoughts on that? And I saw Brian and Valerie. No. Valerie, do you have a comment?
I just wanted to add that Foundry Village is being built as we speak. Just in comment, just to saying there are things out there that are happening right now. So my comment on that is, I think it's pretty obviously we found our next steps, our lead nonprofit organization. To me, I would say we need to go forward and do property exploration and identification, and meanwhile write out what our outcomes are. But I do believe in the continuum, and we do have some places. We have Foundry Village being built as we speak. We have Manzanita opening for 25 people, hopefully very soon. And we've got an organization out there working to get a grant to get a turnkey. So this is just, things are falling in place. It's just things take time. And I think we just need to move forward with this as well.
Thank you. Rick?
I guess I'd like to see the county get involved, and if we could do something together, I think would be a real plus. And if we're able to have a campground outside the city limits, that gives us a lot more land options as well.
Thank you. Valerie?
I just want to add that I do know that Sam Engel, that they have been doing some land exploration. So, I mean, it's just like you never have to reinvent the wheel. There are organizations that have out there been doing that. So I think it's important that perhaps we build that coalition and get everybody together who has, like Kelly said, Kelly knows, Sam Engel's working on it. I mean, I know there are organizations that are already doing it. So I think we just need to, as a city, bring them all to the table and say, where are we, what have you done, rather than try to reinvent the wheel.
Vanessa?
On that note, I would like an updated zoning map with available land under industrial business park and the potential change of general commercial so that we can kind of hone in on that within our own city limits.
Aaron?
So I might have difficulty determining what the definition of available land is, because that could vary. I mean, you could have a building on it and it might be available. You could have, and actually without reaching out to every property owner, it'd be hard to determine what is available. Undeveloped versus developed, we could identify, but available would be a little more difficult to define. And I'm not sure if council's ultimately wanting us to look at available sites. I think one of the key things is for us to make that message clear and try and get some people in the room and start identifying. We may have some identifiable places that will come to us pretty quickly. But that'd be my comment on identifying available sites.
I think, are we in agreement that we want to continue having this discussion and look for available properties, either within or outside the city limits, either way? I'm seeing heads nodding. Rob, you have a comment?
So one thing that I was wondering about, and I think that we should be looking for possible available sites. I'm wondering if we can check, or maybe, I'm not sure who would be the person, Aaron might be the person, to check with the county if there's any incentives as far as tax breaks or anything else we could offer people if they were willing to loan us their land for a year, 2 or 3 years, similar to what they do in Medford, in the sense that the property owner got it cleaned up and they get the brush cleared and the garbage cleared. There was an incentive for them to loan the property, and I'm just wondering if there can be any kind of tax incentive, and I guess that would be up to the county commissioners or whoever, the assessor. So I'd like somebody in this room to potentially reach out to the county to see if that's anything that can be done.
So I'm not aware of any state or federal tax incentives, which is truly what the definition of a tax incentive would be. We could incentivize taxes by meaning you could identify a fund to pay for someone's taxes for the lease of the property or something along those lines, and that would be considered a tax incentive program, also similar to an incentive for system development charges for affordable housing or something along those lines.
Well, what I was thinking is possibly, I don't even know if it's legal, but if the county could potentially waive the taxes in exchange for loaning the property for this particular use. That's what I was thinking.
Vanessa, then Valerie, then Joel.
I was just voting with my hand raised, but since I have the floor, I will say it may be helpful to look to what the city of Medford did to acquire that land. And they haven't acquired it, that's not the correct word, but for the use of that land and how they identified that, the community outreach and so forth.
Certainly, and as the sergeant mentioned, that piece of property was a piece that was a nuisance issue with the city, and the city found an opportunity to say, hey, we're going to clean up your site and alleviate the nuisance issue, which would have cost the property owner money. And in exchange for that money, instead of doing that, the property owner said, yes, you clean up my site, I don't have to do that, it's no longer a nuisance issue, and I'll lease that property for you for that purpose. So that was the incentive from that perspective.
Valerie?
Well, I didn't have my hand up, but I'm just going to say the same thing, that I think the number one step is to get the players in the same room to have a discussion, and having county commissioner there and the city there and UCAN there, Sam Engel there, and have people who are familiar with it have that conversation. I think that's the best place to start.
Joel?
To me, just in summary, it's a sense of community, and we need this conflict. And we don't want to focus on the scarcity of housing. We want to focus on the richness of our relationships. And the richness of our relationships with the citizens of Grants Pass, all of those groups, Rob, that you mentioned, and their different philosophies and their different outlooks, the nonprofits, the business, that we establish a sense of community with the richness of relationships where everybody has a voice, including those that right now don't have a house. And we move forward to build an even better community. And so this is a step that we need, and this is a conflict that we need to resolve to build that sense of community and those richness of relationships. And that's where we need to focus. And it's, you know, there's different steps along the way of identifying property and those kind of things, but we got to keep that in mind in those richness of relationships and that sense of community, because it'll make Grants Pass an even better place to live.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, I agree with Valerie's, and thank you, Joel. That's good stuff, for sure. And I agree with Valerie as far as the next step is to get all the potential players in the room at the same time. I think that's our next step, and we should move to do that as soon as possible.
Brian?
So I think we kind of all have all the players in the room right now. So I know there's been a lot of talk about the county commissioners, and I would love nothing more than for the county commissioners to get on board and to partner with us on this. I wouldn't say that us pursuing solutions necessarily precludes them from needing to be involved. Like if they decide they don't want to, that's not going to stop us necessarily from moving forward. But I would like to see them involved if they are interested in being a part of the solution on this. And then the other piece I wanted to say is most of the conversation today has been about the urban campground, but I think that car camping piece is also really important. And so I think as opposed to focusing solely on just the urban campground, I think that it would be more productive if we're talking about both of those pieces, since both of them are important. And I don't know if that would be the same site or two different sites or what, but I think that both of those things are issues in the community that need to be addressed soon.
All right, I think we have a clear consensus here that we're interested in continuing this conversation and working with our community partners to move forward, as well as identifying some property. So I think at this point, I guess for the record, I'd just like to declare that the City Council is interested in identifying properties in this area, and that if anybody has a property that they own, we're interested in hearing more about it. I think we've kind of reached a point of repetitiveness for today, but Aaron, did you have something?
Yeah, I think I've got enough direction from council that we'll start the process of taking the next steps to identifying and facilitating the implementation process of an urban campground, with also the exploration of a car campground, or identify suitable sites for that also.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a few different directions we need to work on. I also want to thank our community partners, UCAN, City of Medford, Rogue Retreat, for being here today. We really appreciate your time and expertise and the energy that you've put into finding solutions for the homeless in your own community as well as ours. So thank you. That said, bulk water rate.
Sarah.
We'll take a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
Stand up.
You did good.
Oh, yes, but you're interested in that turnkey thing, because I just talked to Colleen Martin
Yeah.
about them reading a letter from us saying and telling the steps that we're making, because they have to put
Welcome back. We have Jason Kennedy, our Public Works Director, with the bulk water rate presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually just wanted to start with this photo. This was last summer at the bulk water station, and remember we came to you and we were having quite a few issues out there. That is one of the busiest locations south of Grants Pass in the early summer. The good news is we do have a second station that is online for this summer. We expect that to help with the traffic at the bulk water stations this year, but we wanted to get to you and discuss bulk water rates, as well as presenting our neighboring community rates and what it does cost to operate those bulk facilities. The city has provided bulk water in some capacity for more than 20 years now. It's just a service that we have always provided. However, bulk water was traditionally provided only to contractors for construction purposes, because that was the primary use. When they are building a subdivision or other large construction project, they have water trucks on site. They wanted to be able to fill those very close to be able to keep dust down, and that was how this process started. Our initial fill station was actually located at the Hillcrest Fire Station. This was way back in the day, and it was actually an honor-based system. There was a coffee can in the little doghouse, and you would pull a slip out of the coffee can and write your name on it, how much water you took, and then you would fill your truck up. I'm sure it was 100% accurate. But when that fire station was upgraded, we installed the new system south of the river at the New Hope Pump Station, and it was actually replaced with a coin and bill system. Prior to 2016, when that system was finally beginning to fail, we were having a very large issue with cash. And what that means is that the unit was collecting too much money that it would actually jam itself in the enclosure. You would open the doors and bills would fly out, coins would roll out. It could not hold as much money as it was collecting. We were having to go out there far more frequently. It also was requiring multiple people, because cash handling requires multiple people. You don't want to send one person out to go handle all of that cash. So the new system was engineered in a way that we do not have cash at the bulk water stations any longer. You can't roll up with a roll of quarters and get your money. However, you can make a phone call to customer service. They can set you up with an account. They can put the money on your account. You can enter your username and your PIN and be delivered water almost immediately. So it is a much more simplified system. The other thing to note is that prior to 2016, we really could not track bulk water. Because it was a cash system, we didn't know who was getting it, who was getting how much. Also, we didn't know really how much they were getting. The new system has alleviated all of that, which is really good. And because what this chart behind us tells us is that in the last few years, the sale of bulk water has skyrocketed. As you can see, the change is not a very gentle slope, but really is a vertical slope. I really want to take a note. The yellow dot on the far right represents 8.5 months of this current fiscal year. And we are already over $180,000 in revenue from the bulk station. We were estimating that would be about $120,000. I am thinking that this bubble will stop, but it's hard to say. We think that those sales would have been even higher had we had the other station open, because really the big lag is trucks waiting to fill. Had we had more throughput, there would have been more trucks filling. This number would be much, much higher than it is today. And that's the same chart, but it is just in a numerical format, whether you like it in a graph. What I did want to note also is that where we are at, $180,000 represents 2% of our collected revenues in that same 8.5 month period. So it has become a reasonably significant portion of our revenue, where before we were 0.5%, 0.2%. As the bulk water sales have increased, it has become a little bit more significant portion of our sales. These are our anticipated volumes. And again, 2020 is a full volume. We don't have 21 on there. You have two anomalies that appear on this chart, and I did want to explain those because they do show up in our revenue streams previous to 2015. 2014 was actually a fire camp that was located in the Merlin area for a long period of the summer. They used a tremendous amount of water, not only just for the fire camp, but they were filling fire trucks to go out into the woods to fight those fires. The other big anomaly was 2010, which was when Paradise Guest Ranch was starting to think about coming online. They had just planted the golf course, and they were filling their ponds from the public supply, utilizing a bulk meter. They racked up quite a significant amount of bulk water in that time period before not opening. We'll go there. So these are the rates of our surrounding neighbors currently. Our rate is in the black. We're at $6.50 per thousand. These are the rates of other water providers around us that we could find. You can see that Cave Junction is at $30 per thousand. It is a fairly significant rate. They do not want to sell bulk water in Cave Junction. Their water supply just really won't handle it. So they have set their pricing accordingly. They still have strings of trucks that come in to serve up water. Veneta, Winston, Dillard, you can see are in the $8 to $12 range. Everyone else is kind of in that $7 and under range. I wanted to just show this. The station that we just constructed in Merlin was just about $30,000 to construct. If we were to build one somewhere at a location downtown, it would be significantly more depending on how much structure we had. But what I'm trying to show is that our cost to construct and operate these are not very significant. So our current rate is covering our cost pretty significantly. And we're paying about $4,300 a year in site maintenance costs. And that includes our software maintenance, plus our transaction charge, plus any incidental site maintenance, which includes valves, pavement, that type of thing. There is no cost implication for raising the bulk water rate. We would just recognize some additional revenue should you choose to do that. There is no call to action date. This is truly at your discretion. The alternatives are listed there, and I would love to answer any questions that you may have.
DJ?
That's a really interesting numbers, Jason. Has there been any significant events or anomalies such as the fire camp or golf course that has happened in these past 8 months to suggest this spike, or do you think that that's more or less expected usage?
I know that state agencies have become more aggressive about cracking down on agricultural water use to where many of the farms that are out in the county are having to show that they have a legal access to water. Their legal source of water has become the bulk water stations. For those types of farms that are growing perhaps hemp or marijuana, they have to have that legal access to water or keep their farms much smaller. That really showed a huge spike this last summer.
Thank you, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Joel?
Good presentation, Jason. It's everything we needed. It was really simple. It kind of surprised me that our rate was competitive with the other towns. There's a great restaurant out by the south, Williams Highway, bulk water station, Dino's Diner.
Yep.
And if you can get there when they're open, they got a great hamburger with avocados on it and great French fries. But as you're sitting there and eating that, they will literally be, Judy and I saw last year, 10 trucks pull up in 15 minutes to fill up water. And they're backed up. And they come from Central Point, they come from Cave Junction, they come from Eagle Point. And I thought to myself, we must be offering really cheap rates because everybody was there.
Yep.
My impression was there was a lot of agricultural use, marijuana, like Valerie just suggested to me there. Seemed like there was a lot of irrigation happening, and it seemed to me like there was some elasticity to the price, which means that you could raise the price and not decrease the quantity a whole lot. There would be, of course, some diminishing returns there if you increased it too much, because there would be some alternative sources. But the people in Cave Junction and the hemp industry out there don't have a lot of sources.
No.
So, and their price out there is really high. So, I think we're looking at, we could be very conservative. We could look at $1 to $2. I don't know what you think would be reasonable in terms of the price increase and the elasticity of demand, but I'd be interested in your opinion. But to me, it would be like $1 or $2.
I don't think you would see $1 or $2 increase decreasing the volume very significantly. What you have, I think our advantage is we are centrally located to all of those locations that you just mentioned. Yeah.
Valerie, then Rick?
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. And actually, when I read the presentation on Monday, or on Friday, I read it, and I didn't see the Merlin site. I mean, because I had known that he had put that in there, and so I was curious. So when did it start? I kind of can't quite.
We had gotten it up and running originally late last summer. We had some issues out there with pressure. As it turns out, the pressure at the Merlin landfill is over 130 PSI. And so it was breaking equipment. As soon as we'd get it online, the valve would break. We had to put a large diameter pressure reducer in. Cost us about $1,200–$1,500. Once we got the pressure knocked down, then we were able to get it calibrated and operating correctly. But because of the excessive pressures, we did not get it online until 2 weeks ago.
Okay, well, that explained that, because it was my understanding that we had it in last year.
It was, but it kept going up and down, up and down.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. And I would agree, and I do know for a fact, because I happen to have somebody who I know who is working in the hemp industry this last summer, who's came to my brother-in-law, that they have really cracked down on the water rights of people trying to get water if they're growing hemp. And so that, I am sure, has resulted in the backlog. And so I would definitely say that an increase is warranted. And I would think also it may be a good time to think about planning. If we're getting that kind of money, putting another station in somewhere to increase the quantity. And I have some great places for the money to go. Number one, for those people who can't pay their water bill. I mean, because one of the things we've always tried to do is keep water with water. And I don't know if does this bulk water rate go into that system? And so that's one of the areas that we've talked about, the fact that, especially with, the need and the rates going up because of our water treatment plant. I mean, those are the two places that I would definitely put that money, is number one, to help those people who can't pay due to our higher rates, and number two, to put that money towards water treatment plant. So I think anybody would tell us we're crazy not to at least take advantage of, our location and use that money accordingly.
Rick?
Thank you, Jason. I like what Valerie said. I would be totally in favor of a price increase. I guess I would want to see what would happen, at least with one season, with having two locations, especially with the Merlin site, before we start looking at a third location. But one question I have for you, what is a typical truck size? Is it 1,000 or 3,000 gallons, or what size is the truck?
It's all across the board. We have some of the smaller farmers that are coming in with 230-gallon totes on their trailers. We have another hauler who rolls in with an 8,000-gallon tanker truck.
So what I'm looking at is, if you have I don't know if it's typical, a 3,000-gallon truck, and you pull in and you fill that entire truck for $21, and then he hauls that material out there, I'm sure they're charging $300, $400, $500 for that water to the user. There's great opportunity to raise the rate and have very little effect upon the operation. And I can see with the shortage, well, the rains haven't been raining like they used to, that this summer could be a major source of income and usage of the bulk water. So I would be in favor of a significant increase. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Jason? Vanessa?
Where are our stations at?
So the one is located at our New Hope pump station, which is at the intersection of New Hope and Williams Highway. The other is at the Merlin landfill at the old Joe Grow location. So we partnered with Republic Services, and it's actually behind their gate. So that one is only open during Republic's business hours.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you,
So
Jason.
I can come back with a resolution for you. A suggested dollar amount would be awesome.
Rick?
I would like to suggest $12.
Vanessa?
Doesn't have to be exact, but in your opinion, what would put it more on par with residential use for that same amount?
This is way over residential use for that amount. It's our most expensive water that we have.
So that would decrease the cost?
Yes,
Okay.
significantly.
Okay.
Per 1,000 gallons. It's the
That is
most
correct, yeah, per
expensive.
thousand, $12
Because,
dollars
yes,
per thousand is what I
pay a
heard.
heck of a base fee, so I'd gladly pay my $6.50. Brian?
I'd be in the same range as Rick. I think we could try $12 and see, you know, as long as it doesn't kill demand, why not?
We have 2 counselors in favor of $12. Any other thoughts? All right, sounds like we're going to float 12 out there. Thank you, Jason.
Great. And just one real quick one, if I may, Mayor. I left you guys a flyer in our water quality report from 2020. The flyers, the postcards will be mailed out to every household in Grants Pass starting this week to notify them that the water report is available. Those folks can either go to the website or call us and receive one mailed to them directly. So I just wanted to give that to you in advance. Thank you.
Good looking report there. All right, next up, agenda review. So we have a meeting
Oh, go ahead.
next Monday. We have a workshop to talk about our URA program descriptions, the DMO contract, electric charging stations and downtown restroom options. Looks like that's coming back up. Thoughts, comments, questions? No?
I just have a question about the URA program descriptions.
Okay.
I'm not totally sure what that is.
So within the Urban Renewal Agency, we have grant funds. We have grants that we're further defining. So for instance, you can use urban renewal dollars for a fire suppression system, or safety ingress and egress, or certain investments in your building. And so we are defining those different programs. There's about 5 to 7 different programs that we're going to be bringing to you that you'll be creating with urban renewal dollars, a grant program for businesses.
Was this driven by council or staff?
This is, well, it was originally driven by council from a standpoint of you have an urban renewal agency and you have defined programs. The problem is we've got some programs that aren't defined on how you allocate the resources. This provides additional definition on how you allocate resources.
On the existing programs?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and then on next Wednesday's business meeting, we have a public hearing to discuss the proposed ordinance change to the Adult Use Development Code. Public hearing on the comprehensive plan to zone amendment regarding GP Downs, and a continuation of that scenic resources public hearing that we've continued twice now. Hopefully we can wrap that up. And then a grant incentive request from Active Sports and Family Chiropractor, we've moved a couple items off the agenda. Most notably, I think, is the DMO contract discussion, and we just wanted to give everybody a little bit more time between Monday's workshop and talking about the DMO contract as well as the DMO executive director search. So that's moved on to April 21st at this time. I think you all have some questions about that. So then remaining on the April 7th, now we have request from Vice Brewing for a couple of different grant requests, the Washington Boulevard street trees, resolution to discuss a specific request about alcohol use in Riverside Park, and then the residential backflow testing contract. Any questions about any of that? No? Okay. Anything else further on down the line that you have a question about or item you'd like to see added to the agenda? Valerie.
Yes, just in this brief break between when we had the discussion on the urban campground, something came to fruition about the turnkey grant that we were talking about. Actually, they brought forward and said two things. Number one, that they're still struggling to get the Manzanita site going, and they're not sure if that's going to fly or not, but they did bring up the turnkey project and said that they have to have the approval, they have to have everything in place for it to operate by June 15th in order for them to get the keys to actually have that happen. So what that does is it pushes up for us, because they need a letter from this council and the mayor or whatever. They need a letter that says that that it will be able to operate in that location. And as it is right now, it cannot operate in that location because this is located in the general commercial. So even with us looking at talking about a conditional, the social service contract April 12th, unless we got that on the meeting April 12th, they're going to have a hard time making that happen. So I don't know what that means. I just know that we need to really either do something, I don't know if we can do, I talked with you earlier, Aaron, about maybe some sort of emergency thing, or what we could do as a council to push it forward. But I think it's really imperative that we get that going so that they have the backing of us, the city, saying that we would allow that to open.
Yeah, so you're sort of in a tough situation from a standpoint of process. One thing is, if there's going to be a letter signed by the mayor or whoever in support of a turnkey program, it really is something that needs to be discussed at a council level, maybe at a workshop or something, to provide that direction to have that done. We haven't had that discussion yet. The other part is, if that letter's to say we're going to do it, you're saying you're going to do it before you've actually had public hearings and heard public and done that. And so that is a concern also. So what the letter will say, we could talk about it some more when you have a general discussion, but those are two issues I see right now. They have a timing issue, and maybe at some point in time, when you've taken action, you can have a letter saying, hey, it's done and it's an allowable use. But I would have some concern at this point with providing direction saying you're going to do it when you haven't really gone through the public process.
My question is, how long does that public process take, and can we get it started like right away? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, so we can get that started as soon as you start taking action on it from a first reading, second reading perspective, and moving forward to adoption of an ordinance. And so your whatever business need, we have to provide certain notice and stuff, but scheduling it for an upcoming business meeting and going through that process.
Have you been contacted? Do you know if the city's been contacted by the applicant? Because that's what we discussed last week, is that they needed to start that process by contacting us.
Yeah, I've gotten a roundabout emails sent to me, but no one has reached out to me just saying, hey, we should do a letter, but no one is from All Care or anyone else has said, we're requesting a letter from, or something along those lines, but we're getting there. I mean, I've got some emails I can follow up on. There still needs to be discussion at a council level. We have enough information to have a discussion at the council level, but that would need to be put on a workshop to see if you're in support and what kind of letter you'd like to write.
Okay. Does anybody know, do they need something beyond a letter?
Well, I talked with Colleen. She called me on, I think, Friday, Saturday, and she's one of the key people behind it. And she said that they needed a letter from the city. I think I sent a copy to you, Sarah, as well as a copy of the Medford ones. And she sent a couple of, an example of a letter that Medford had sent when they received theirs. And so I sent that immediately to Aaron, and I sent one to you, I think, Sarah, so that you could take a look at it, because it was actually their mayor who signed it. So that was kind of like to bring you into the loop, to say, hey, this is something we need to just get on top of right now. I was under the understanding at the beginning of this meeting that we just had to have it all done by June 15th. But in talking to Chad and Kelly, they said no, the grant it had to be done earlier than that. So that's what threw me
We're
off.
really talking about the item, and if
Yeah.
this is something you want to, you really should schedule it for a workshop.
Yes, and I think we need to put on a workshop, and I'd like to see it as soon as possible, which would be April 5th. I know that's kind of that craziness, but I will also say that the conversation on the DMO may not be as long as you think it is, just because, especially if you push that off for 2 more weeks, because as of last Friday, we were just going and taking a look at the lawyer's perspective. So I'm glad that I was pushed off down the way, but that may free up some time if the DMO contract is less, to have that conversation on the 5th. It's coming from April 5th.
Okay, so is council interested in having this added to the April 5th workshop? I'm seeing yes from Rick and Rob and Brian. Okay, so we can add that. Is there something that we can move off? Electric charging stations and downtown restrooms? Does that, no? We're just going to do it all? We're just going to do it all. Okay. We'll add turnkey grant. Anything else? DJ?
Glad I woke up there. The Housing Advisory Committee has just finalized and made a motion on ADUs and the combination of those ADUs. And we've been waiting for that conversation to happen, so they've chewed on it. I'd like to get that also put on a near future workshop, you know, given all the other important topics. But I'd kind of like council's direction to pull that out and get it on the workshop, all things considered again.
Are you asking whether people would like to have that added
Yeah,
to the workshop?
I'm
Okay.
wanting to gauge the temperatured favor of that
I'm
topic.
seeing yes, Vanessa,
Okay.
Valerie, Joel,
Yeah.
Kurt, okay. We will
Is,
get-
is that particular motion that they made more time sensitive than the other 2 motions they made in that meeting? Because there were 3 that I think we're going to hear at our next business meeting.
Yeah, this is the one that we can jump right on action. But yes, they did make 3 motions. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Anybody want to adjourn?
No,
DJ, is that a motion?
I move to adjourn the workshop.
Second from Rick, thank you. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we'll see you all back here next Monday.